It was somewhat of a delightful experience to be concluding my reflections and thoughts on taking notes for this week's sermon during the vestry retreat that took place just yesterday. The vestry gathered out at St. Columba, one of our beautiful camp and conference center, just on the outside of town, and we got to reflect on the life and ministry and what it is that Church of the Holy Communion is being called to embark upon and to do in this coming year. What makes a delightful experience in relation to this passage is that we find Jesus taking a handful of disciples with him up on top of the mountain to do what is essentially the staging ground for the work that is to follow, the work that is to lead them into Jerusalem, to take his life and hand it over, to suffer, to die, and then to be raised again. You see, on both sides of what we heard from the gospel today, Jesus tells his disciples that what is to come next is that I am to undergo suffering and to be put to death. A very challenging and difficult thing for them to grasp as they understand who he is as the Messiah. It was just days before that Peter actually proclaimed, "You are the Messiah, the Holy One." And now all of a sudden, they hear this first message of saying that the Messiah has to die. And they go up on this mountain. And of course, it's only natural for Peter to want to say, "We've made it. We actually don't have to go through this death and dying process with the Messiah. Let us build dwellings. In fact, we have Moses and Elijah here with us. We have everything that we need." But what happens in that moment is a cloud descends. This murkiness, this fogginess that disorients all of us. All of us in our walk of faith may find ourselves in moments of being ecstatic and very clear about what our life is about and where we have found ourselves, all of a sudden to be covered in a cloud, disoriented. And yet in that moment, the gospel tells us that is when the voice comes. "This is my son, the chosen one. Listen to him." What a simple, poignant instruction for all of us. The clouds cover our lives, and what are we to do? Listen. So they come down the mountain. We don't hear that part of the story either. What happens immediately upon coming down the mountain, from this moment of clarity, then being rebuked, is a moment where they encounter the challenges of life. They're met head on with a man asking for healing for his son. The disciples are unable to do this, so Jesus does this for them. Not too long ago, Kendall and I bought our first house. This was a moment where we thought to ourselves, wow, we're actually adults now. We've fully arrived. We've done it all now. We've seen it all. We have a house. We signed all the papers. And it felt good. It felt like maybe we had arrived. But then the garbage disposal went out. There's a leak in the roof. Good news was all of these could be covered under a warranty. But something else came up that we weren't quite expecting either. Our bathroom faucet was such that our children, who are now becoming more self-sufficient and using the bathroom and washing their hands, were unable to actually turn on the water appropriately without having the risk of scalding their hands with hot water. So the idea came from Kendall to say, let's put in a new faucet. And I'm sitting here sweating, thinking, gosh, I don't know if we can afford to do this. This is, we're paying a lot of money for the house and this expense. And then all of a sudden she goes, there's YouTube out there. So we buy this faucet. And I'm given this kind of challenge, which I'm a little anxious about, but I have to say, I changed the bathroom faucet completely. And it leaked a little bit the first day and the second day, but I went back and I tweaked it and I kept working with it. But by the end, it was actually in that moment that I realized that's when I felt the most that I'd owned my first house. It wasn't signing the papers, but it was actually spending some really hard, challenging work and doing something of my own, putting myself into the house in a way that I had never done before. I think our journeys of faith and spirituality can be similar to this. We can find ourselves feeling as though we have arrived. Maybe we've gone on retreat, we've had a spiritual awakening, or we come to Sunday church every week, feeling as though we are at the pinnacle of our spiritual experience. But what we learn from the gospel today is that to truly indeed recognize the face of the Messiah, to recognize the glorious Christ, it's in coming down the mountain. It's in meeting head on someone asking for our help, someone saying, life is too hard, something has come in my way, bring me some good news. See, it's kind of on both sides of the mountaintop experience. That moment is amplified by the suffering, by the challenges, by the pains that we all encounter. What's interesting in this story are the two men, Elijah and Moses, and the way that Luke talks about this dazzling white clothes. That exact phrase shows up one more time in Luke's gospel. It shows up at a moment when Peter is sprinting full speed to the empty tomb. He's greeted by two men in dazzling white clothes. It is not Christ who is standing there in the dazzling white clothes, but it is two men who have encountered Christ, the risen Christ. And Peter's response mirrors so often our responses. There's the temptation on the mountain to hold back, to stay and keep things just like they are. And then there's the risk. There is the sprinting full force to the unknown, to the empty tomb, to the place that has just experienced the cross. Our season of Lent is nearly upon us. We are faced with opportunities to come down a mountain, opportunities to hold back, opportunities to sprint full speed ahead to Easter morning. I think as we own our faith, both individually and as a community, we own it by taking step after step after step down the mountain. This morning, David Waters shared with us the rich stories that he had the opportunity to experience in covering the life of faith in Memphis. Day in, day out, year in, year out, incrementally. And he gave us hope in that talk. He gave us a sense of hope that indeed it builds upon itself. So as we journey through these next chapters of our life together, as we begin to prepare for a Holy Lent, let us build on what has come before. Let us build on our experiences both in the mountain and in the valleys, with the prophets and with the law, but also with one another in our community of Memphis. Let us resist the temptation to hold back. Let us face head on what is down the mountain. And look always for the face of Christ, dazzling in one another and in the community around us. Amen.